Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Fall 2008 in Austin. The Perry Castanda Library, massive with its gray walls and endless rows of books, was the heart of the University of Texas campus. Students, wrapped in scarves, hurried between lectures, and heavy clouds hung over the city, promising rain. Rachel Campbell, 21, sat by the window on the third floor of the library, surrounded by dictionaries and notebooks. Her blonde hair was casually pulled back into a bun, and on her nose were a pair of thin-framed glasses that she only wore for reading. She studied linguistics, but secretly dreamed of something else: children's books full of talking animals and magical forests. Rachel leafed through her phonetics textbook, but her gaze kept wandering to the window, where drops began to drum on the glass. She loved the rain; it made the world cozier, as if wrapping her in a soft blanket. Her fingers were absent-mindedly fiddling with the corner of the page when she heard rustling from the next table. "Excuse me," the voice was low, slightly hoarse. "Do you know where the books on soil science are?" Rachel looked up and met the gaze of a guy who looked like he had just walked out of the woods. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, a warm plaid shirt, jeans with a barely noticeable stain of soil on the knee. He held a tattered notebook in his hands and a pencil tucked behind his ear. His eyes, green, with a slight spark of curiosity, made her forget for a second that she was actually supposed to answer. "Soil science?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. I think it's on the fourth floor. There is a department of agriculture." He smiled, not widely, but sincerely, and from this smile Rachel suddenly felt warm in her chest. "Thank you. I'm Michael, by the way, Michael Grayson." Rachel Campbell, she extended her hand, but immediately became embarrassed, because in the library no one makes introductions like that. Michael, however, shook her hand, and his hand turned out to be warm and slightly rough. "What are you, a farmer?" she asked, nodding at the stain on her jeans. He laughed quietly so as not to attract the librarian's attention. "Not really. Agronomy. I'm learning to plant things so that the world doesn't starve." "Wow," Rachel raised her eyebrows. "Is it like a superhero, only with a shovel instead of a cape?" "Something like that." He sat down on the edge of the chair opposite, as if he was about to leave, but changed his mind. "And you? What are you studying?" "Linguistics," she shrugged. "Sounds, words, how people speak. But to be honest, I prefer making up stories." "Stories?" He leaned a little closer, and Rachel caught a slight smell of pine needles, as if he had just walked in the park. "Which ones, for example?" She hesitated. She usually didn't talk about her dreams to the first person she met, but there was something soothing about this guy, as if he really wanted to hear. "Children's. About rabbits who are looking for treasure, or about an owl who is afraid of the dark." Michael nodded, as if it was the most serious thing in the world. "Cool. I had a book when I was a kid about a raccoon who built a raft. I read it 100 times until I tore it up." "Oh, raccoons are mass bandits." Rachel smiled. "I'll have to write about a raccoon." "If you write, I'll be the first to buy," he said, and there was not a drop of mockery in his voice. The rain outside the window intensified, turning the street into a blurry watercolor. Rachel looked at her notes, then at Michael. "You didn't just sit here for nothing, did you?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He scratched the back of his head, and his cheeks turned slightly pink. "Well, to be honest, I noticed you an hour ago. You smiled the whole time while you read. I thought it was worth meeting such a person." Rachel felt her face heat up. She was not used to compliments, especially from strangers. "Do you always speak so straightforwardly?" she asked, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Only when I'm nervous," he admitted, and they both laughed, quietly, so as not to get reprimanded. Over the next few days, Rachel found herself searching for Michael in the crowd of students. They encountered each other again a week later on the same third floor of the library. This time he was holding not a notepad in his hands, but a paper cup of coffee. "This is for you," he said, placing the glass in front of her. "You looked like you could use some trouble. Were you following me?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, but took the coffee. Her name was written on the lid, clumsily, in pencil. "I didn't follow. I just remembered that you drink a latte." He shrugged, but the corners of his lips twitched into a smile. "Where are you from?" She began, but stopped short. "Wait, did you see how I ordered at the cafe?" "I'm sorry," he raised his hands, as if giving up. "But I'm not crazy, I promise. I just, I liked you." Rachel took a sip of her coffee to hide the way her heart was pounding. The latte was perfect with a slight hint of vanilla, just the way she liked it. "Okay, Michael Grayson," she said, looking at him over her glass. "You won. But now it's your turn to tell. What do you love besides the earth and trees?" He thought, looking out the window, where the rain was again drawing patterns. "Simple things. Walk through the forest. Listen to the old floors creaking in the house. Read letters." "Letters?" Rachel perked up. "Who writes letters now?" "I am," he said, and there was such conviction in his voice that she couldn't help but smile. "My grandmother taught me. She said that writing is like giving someone a piece of your soul." "It's beautiful," Rachel said quietly. "I also love letters, but I usually write them in my head and never send them." "Then let's do it this way," Michael suggested, leaning closer. "You will write me a letter, the real thing on paper, and I'll write to you, and we will exchange." "Seriously?" She laughed. "What is this, homework?" "The best," he winked. "Just don't write it off." 3 days later, Rachel sat in her dorm room, holding a piece of paper in her hands. She chose the most beautiful pen with blue ink and began to write. The letter was long, full of stories about her childhood, about hiding under the covers with a flashlight, reading fairy tales, about her fear that no one would love her stories. She ended it with, "You're right, Michael. A letter is like a piece of the soul. I hope you don't lose mine." When they met in Zilker Park to exchange letters, the sky was gray again. Michael came in the same plaid shirt, with an envelope in his hand. They sat down on the bench, and Rachel handed him her letter, feeling her fingers tremble. "Don't read now," she asked. "This is too personal." "Okay," he nodded, "but don't read mine either, until you're ready." They sat in silence, looking out over the Colorado River until the rain started again. Michael took a bag of turkey and avocado sandwiches from his backpack, wrapped in wax paper. "What, now you're also feeding me?" Rachel laughed, taking the sandwich. "We must maintain the strength of the future writer," he said, and his eyes sparkled from the rain, and something else, something that made her heart clench. "Michael," she said quietly, looking at him, "why are you so real?" He shrugged, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Because it doesn't work out any other way with you." The rain poured more and more heavily, but they did not leave. Rachel leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth through the wet fabric of his shirt. She didn't know that this feeling light as the wings of a butterfly and deep as the roots of a tree would be the beginning of everything. Their loves, their families, their pains. Later that night, in her room, Rachel opened Michael's letter. His handwriting was neat, but with slight curls, as if he wrote slowly, thinking about each word. He talked about his childhood on a farm, how he planted apple trees with his father and dreamed that one day he would have his own garden. He wrote about her, how her smile reminded him of a sunny day after a long winter. He ended by adding, "Rachel, I don't know what's next, but I want to find out with you." She clutched the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to make up a story. She already lived in one. The spring of 2010 in Austin turned out to be warm, with a soft wind that carried the aroma of blooming magnolias. Rachel Campbell, now almost Rachel Grayson, stood in front of the mirror in the small room she had rented for her wedding preparations. Her dress was simple white, with lace sleeves and a long skirt that barely touched the floor. She didn't want a big ceremony, and Michael, as always, supported her. Their wedding was to take place in Zilker Park, under the same oak tree where 2 years ago they exchanged their first letters. "You look like something out of a fairy tale," said her friend Emma, adjusting her veil. Emma was the only bridesmaid, and her warm smile calmed Rachel's nerves. "I just want everything to go smoothly," Rachel replied, fiddling with a thin bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Michael, engraved with "Always yours." "What if it rains?" "Rain." Emma laughed. "You and Michael met in the rain. It will be like a blessing." Rachel smiled, remembering that day in the library. 2 years flew by in a flash, endless walks, letters that they continued to write to each other, even living in the same city, and quiet evenings when Michael read her his notes on agronomy, and she shared sketches of fairy tales. They were young, in love, and full of faith that their life would be as simple and bright as their dreams. The ceremony was short but sincere. Michael stood under an oak tree in a dark blue suit that he had to rent because he stubbornly refused to spend money on disposable clothes. His eyes sparkled as he watched Rachel walk towards him across the grass, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "Do you still want to connect your life with a guy who is always on the ground?" he asked as they stood opposite each other. Rachel laughed, her voice shaking with excitement. "Only if you promise to plant trees for our children." "It's agreed," he said, and his voice was so warm that she felt her heart clench. They exchanged vows that they wrote themselves. Rachel promised to be his light in his darkest days, and Michael promised to be her roots that would always keep her grounded. As they kissed, the guests, 30 in total, mostly relatives and close friends, applauded, and thunder roared somewhere in the distance. It started to rain, but no one ran to hide. Rachel and Michael danced their first dance under an umbrella, laughing until their clothes were soaked through. "This is definitely our style," Michael said, hugging her close. "You can't imagine anything better," she answered, feeling the drops running down her cheeks, mixing with happy tears. A month after the wedding, they moved to the suburbs of Austin, to a small house on a street surrounded by greenery. The house was old, with peeling blue paint and creaky floors, but for Rachel and Michael it was perfect. The area behind the house was small, but Michael immediately announced that he would turn it into a garden. "There will be an apple tree here," he said, standing in the backyard on the first day. He held a shovel in his hands, and on his face was that same concentrated smile that Rachel loved so much. "And there, by the fence, is a cherry tree, and maybe a pear." "Are you seriously going to grow an entire forest?" she asked, sitting on the porch with a mug of tea. "Not a forest." He stuck the shovel into the ground. "House. A real home begins with trees." Rachel watched him, feeling her heart fill with warmth. She liked the way he talked about the future calmly, confidently, as if he had already seen their life in 10, 20 years. She took out her notebook and started writing. Her new tale was about a squirrel named Sami who was looking for the perfect place for her nut. Every word that she wrote on paper seemed to be a reflection of her life with Michael, the search for her place, her home. Their days quickly found a rhythm. Michael got a job with a local landscaping company. He left early in the morning and returned with dirt under his fingernails and stories about new projects. Rachel worked part-time in a bookstore and devoted the rest of her time to her stories. In the evenings, they cooked dinner, usually something simple like pasta or fried chicken, and sat on the porch watching the sunset. "What did you write today?" Michael asked one day as they ate spaghetti with tomato sauce he had made from tomatoes grown in their tiny garden. "About the squirrel," Rachel answered, sipping wine from a cheap glass. "She found her tree, but now she's afraid that the nut will be stolen." Michael thought, chewing. "Maybe she needs a friend, someone to help guard the nut." "You're always so practical," she smiled. "And you? What did you plant today?" "2 maples for the park in the center," he shrugged. "And I also thought that we should plant roses at the entrance." "You like roses, right?" "I love you," she said quietly, looking at him. "But do you know what I love more?" "What?" "You." Michael was embarrassed, as always when she said such things directly. He cleared his throat, but his eyes gave everything away. They shone like those of a boy who had fallen in love for the first time. "You did this on purpose, right?" he muttered. "To make me blush." "It works," she winked. By autumn, their yard began to transform. Michael planted the promised apple tree, and although it was still as thin as a twig, he was already planning how he would collect the fruits from it. Rachel finished her first full-length manuscript, a short book about Sammy the squirrel and her sparrow friend Finn. She sent it to several publishers, but there were no answers yet. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if she had the courage to continue. What if no one wants to read it? She said to Michael one day as they lay in the dark, listening to the crickets chirping outside the window. He turned to her, his hand finding hers under the blanket. "Then I will be your first reader," he said, "and my biggest fan." "You have to say that, you are my husband," she tried to joke, but her voice trembled. "I'm serious, Ratch," he pulled her closer. "Your stories, they are like you. They have hearts. Someone will definitely see this." She buried her nose in his shoulder, smelling the earth and soap. With Michael, anything seemed possible, even her wildest dreams. By the spring of 2011, their life became even more comfortable. Rachel started a small blog where she shared excerpts from her fairy tales and thoughts about creativity. She only had a few dozen readers, but every comment made her heart beat faster. Michael, meanwhile, received a promotion. Now he was not just planting trees, but also developing landscaping plans for local parks. He would bring home the sketches, lay them out on the kitchen table, and explain to Rachel how maples and oaks could transform a space. "Look," he said one day, showing her the drawing, "there will be an alley here, and there are benches so people can sit and watch the sunset." "It's beautiful," Rachel said, tracing the lines with her finger. "You make the world a better place, you know." "I'm just planting trees," he shrugged, but she saw his eyes light up. "No," she shook her head, "you create places where people will be happy. It's like my squirrel Sammy, only bigger." Michael looked at her, and for a second time stood still. Then he leaned down and kissed her slowly, as if he wanted to remember this moment forever. "You always know what to say," he whispered. "That's my job," she answered, smiling. Towards the end of the year, Rachel received a letter from a small publishing house. They were interested in her manuscript, but asked to make changes. She was jumping around the kitchen, waving the letter, and Michael looked at her with a smile that said, "I told you so." "They want my book," she screamed, throwing herself on his neck. "Of course they do," he said, picking her up. "You're a genius." "I haven't done anything yet." She shook her head, but her eyes were shining. "This is just the beginning." "That's a lot," said Michael, "and I'm proud of you." That night, they could not sleep for a long time. Rachel lay looking at the stars through the window and thinking about how far they had come. 2 years ago, she was a student who was afraid that her dreams would remain in notebooks. Now she was a wife, a writer, a person who built a home not just from walls, but from love, hopes, and small moments that added up to their life. "Michael," she whispered in the darkness. He turned to her. "Thank you for being my home." He didn't respond with words. He simply took her hand and squeezed it, as if to say, "Always." Their life was simple but complete. The summer of 2012 in the Austin suburbs was hot, with long days when the sun bathed everything in gold and the air smelled of mown grass and blooming magnolia on the porch. Rachel Grayson, who had recently turned 25, sat on an old wicker chair in their small house, her hand resting on her rounded belly. She was 6 months pregnant, and her life seemed to be even brighter than before. Michael, now 28, was pottering around in the yard, checking on the apple tree he planted 2 years ago. Their garden slowly grew, just like their dreams. Rachel was flipping through her notebook, where she was writing down ideas for a new fairy tale about a little fox who learns to be brave. But her thoughts kept returning to the baby who was moving inside her. She and Michael found out she was pregnant earlier this year, on a cold February day when she felt strange and bought a test at the pharmacy. 2 stripes changed everything. Michael froze when he saw the result, and then hugged her so tightly that she could barely breathe. "We will be parents," he whispered then, and his voice trembled with happiness. "Are you ready for this?" Rachel asked, looking into his eyes. "With you?" "Always," he replied, and they laughed, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, holding hands. Since then, their lives have revolved around their unborn child. Rachel read books about pregnancy, trying not to panic over each new sensation. Michael, as always, was her support. He brought her cold lemonade on hot days, massaged her back when she complained of pain, and even tried to cook according to recipes from the internet, although his experiments more often ended in laughter and ordering pizza. "Are you sure this is edible?" Rachel asked one day, looking at the suspiciously black pie he proudly placed on the table. "It's creative," Michael said, scratching the back of his head. "But I can run for ice cream." "You better run," she smiled, and he kissed her forehead before grabbing the keys. They decided not to find out the sex of the child in advance. Rachel liked to come up with names for both options, and Michael simply said, "The main thing is to be healthy." They turned the second bedroom into a children's room. They painted the walls a soft yellow and hung curtains with a pattern of stars. Michael assembled the crib with his own hands, although the instructions nearly drove him crazy. "This is worse than planting 100 trees," he muttered, sitting on the floor among screws and wooden parts. Rachel, sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea, watched him and couldn't help but smile. "You can do it, Grayson. You are my superhero." He raised his head and grinned. "And you are my muse with a notebook, so we're even." By August, Rachel was feeling heavy but happy. Her blog about fairy tales began to gain more readers, and she even received another letter from the publisher asking for a new manuscript. But all this faded into the background. Her thoughts were occupied with the baby. She and Michael would often lie on the couch, and he would put his hand on her stomach, feeling the kicks. "This child is going to be a football player," he said one evening when the baby was kicking especially vigorously. "Or a dancer," Rachel answered, resting her head on his shoulder. "Can you imagine how he will run around our garden?" "Oh, yes," Michael smiled. "I can already see him climbing an apple tree, and I'm running after him with a net." "With a net?" She laughed. "Are you going to catch our child?" "Only if he's too quick," he winked. "But you know, Ratch, I'm really looking forward to it. All of this." She looked at him, feeling her heart swell. Michael was not one to say many words about love, but his actions, every look, every little gesture spoke for him. "Me too," she said quietly. "We'll be good parents, right?" "The best," he answered, and there was not a drop of doubt in his voice. Labor began in mid-October, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Rachel woke up during the night with sharp pain that didn't feel like normal Braxton Hicks contractions. She nudged Michael, who was sleeping next to him with his nose buried in the pillow. "Michael," she whispered, trying to breathe evenly. "Looks like it's time." He instantly woke up, his eyes widening. "Is it time? Right now?" "Yes," she nodded, feeling a new wave of pain rolling through her body. "It's time." Michael jumped up, almost getting tangled in the blanket. He helped Rachel get ready, grabbed the bag she had prepared, and led her to the car. The drive to the hospital was short, but for Rachel it took forever. She held Michael's hand, squeezing it every time a contraction came. "You did great, Ratch," he said, trying to remain calm, although his voice shook slightly. "Everything will be fine." "You promised," she breathed, trying to smile. "So don't let me down." "Never," he answered, and his gaze was so firm that she believed it. Everything in the hospital went quickly, but exhaustingly. Rachel labored for almost 10 hours, and by the end she felt like she'd run a marathon. Michael was there all the time holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering words of encouragement. When the baby's thin cry was finally heard, Rachel began to cry with relief and happiness. "It's a boy," the midwife said, placing the tiny bundle on her chest. Rachel looked at the baby, red, wrinkled, with dark fluff on his head. His eyes were closed, but he already seemed to her the most beautiful in the world. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his tiny hand. Michael leaned over, his face glowing. "He's perfect," he said, his voice shaking. "You're perfect." They named him Jake. Jake Michael Grayson. It sounded right, like it was made for him. The first weeks with Jake were a mixture of excitement and chaos. Rachel and Michael learned everything on the fly: how to change diapers, how to calm a cry, how to survive on 3 hours of sleep. Jake was a quiet baby, which surprised them both. He rarely cried. More often, he simply looked at the world with his large gray eyes, as if studying it. They spent hours just watching him. Rachel loved holding him on her chest, feeling the warmth of his small body. Michael made toys wooden blocks that he carved in the garage, and even tried to sing lullabies, although his voice was far from melodic. "You're not Bob Dylan, you know," Rachel teased as he tried to sing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." "Hey, Jake likes it," Michael answered, looking at his son, who was snoring peacefully. "Really, Guy?" Their house was filled with new sounds: Jake's quiet cooing, the creaking of the crib, the whispers of his parents, who were afraid to wake him up. Rachel almost stopped writing, but that didn't bother her. Her fairy tales could wait now. Her world revolved around her son. Michael returned to work a week after giving birth, but every evening he rushed home to hold Jake or give Rachel an hour to rest. "How are you coping?" he asked one day when he found her in the kitchen, tired but smiling. "I can handle it," she answered, stirring the soup. "But you know what helps?" "What?" "You." She looked at him, and her eyes sparkled. "You are always there." Michael stepped towards her and hugged her, carefully so as not to disturb Jake, who was sleeping in the next room. "And I always will," he said. Jake grew up, and his first months were full of little joys. He started smiling at 2 months, a wide, toothless smile that made Rachel's heart skip a beat. He loved it when Michael tossed him into the air and made funny sounds like laughter. Rachel photographed every moment: Jake in his teddy onesie, Jake with the wooden block, Jake sleeping on Michael's shoulder. But there were also little things that they did not notice. Jake didn't always look them in the eyes when they spoke to him. Sometimes he would freeze, looking at the ceiling, as if he saw something there that they did not see. He didn't reach for toys as much as the other kids Rachel had seen at the park. But she brushed aside these thoughts. Every child is different, she told herself. Jake was their miracle, their bright baby, and that was enough. "He's just calm," she told Michael one day when they were walking in the park with the stroller. Jake looked at the leaves moving in the wind, his face focused. "Like me," Michael answered, smiling. "Remember when you said that I was too thoughtful?" "Oh, yes," Rachel laughed. "Maybe he inherited your love of silence." "And yours for stories," he added, squeezing her hand. "We made a good guy, Ratch." "The best," she agreed. By the spring of 2013, Jake was 6 months old. He began to sit up, albeit with support, and his smile grew even brighter. Rachel returned to her blog, occasionally posting notes about motherhood, how Jake loves to listen to her voice when she reads her fairy tales to him, or how he falls asleep to the rustling of leaves outside the window. Her readers wrote warm comments, and this gave her strength. Michael planted another tree in the yard, a small pear, as he once promised. "This is for Jake," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "so that he knows that he has his own tree." Rachel looked at him, holding her son in her arms, and thought that their life was like a garden that they grew together. Autumn 2016 in Austin was mild, with cool mornings and golden leaves swirling above their small house. Jake was 4 years old, and his world seemed to be as bright as ever. He loved to sit under the apple tree in the yard, play with the wooden blocks that Michael had made, or watch the shadows of the leaves dance on the walls. But for Rachel and Michael Grayson, this year brought the first shadows of doubts that they tried so hard not to notice. Rachel, now 29, sat at the kitchen table, flipping through notes in her notebook. She almost didn't write fairy tales. All her time was spent on Jake, on his smiles and silent moments, which became more and more noticeable. Michael, 32, returned from work later than usual, his plaid shirt soiled and his face tired, but he still smiled when he saw Rachel. "How is our guy?" he asked, taking off his shoes at the door. "Quiet as always," Rachel answered, trying to keep her voice light. "Played with blocks all day. I didn't even want to go for a walk." Michael nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a little longer. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down opposite. She shrugged, fiddling with the corner of her notebook. "Just thinking. He's so special, Michael. but sometimes I don't know what's going on in his head. Michael extended his hand, covering hers with his own. He's just Jake, he said. Maybe he just loves his world more than ours. Rachel nodded, but her heart sank. She wanted to believe that everything was normal, that their son was just calm, as they told each other. But the past months had brought questions she couldn't ignore. Jake didn't talk like other kids his age. He could repeat words, apple tree, cube, mom, but rarely used them to ask or say something. He did not always respond to his name. Sometimes he froze, looking into emptiness, or swayed while sitting on the floor. Rachel noticed how other parents in the park exchanged glances when Jake did not run to play with their children, but sat to the side, moving pebbles into neat rows. Maybe we should take him to the doctor, she said quietly, almost afraid of her words. Michael frowned, his fingers squeezing her hand a little tighter. Do you think something is wrong? I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling, but I want to be sure. He was silent for several seconds, looking at the table where the traces of their life lay: Jake's childhood drawing, a couple of pencils, her half-finished blog post. Okay, he finally said. Let's do this. For him. The first visit to the pediatrician was in early October. Dr. Miller, an elderly woman with kind eyes, watched Jake as he sat on the office floor, lining up the blocks into a perfect tower. Rachel and Michael answered her questions, trying not to look at each other when she asked about speech, contact with other children, reactions to noise or change. He's very focused, Dr. Miller said, smiling at Jake, but I would recommend consultation with a specialist. There are some signs to check for. Signs of what? Michael asked, his voice level, but Rachel could hear the tension. We don't expect anything bad yet, the doctor answered, but her tone was too cautious. Perhaps these are just developmental features. But it's better to be sure. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She looked at Jake, who, not paying attention to the adults, was carefully placing one cube on top of another. Her baby, her bright boy. How could there be any signs? What did she mean? Rachel asked as they drove home. Jake was asleep in his car seat, his head tilted to the side. Michael looked at the road, his hands firmly on the steering wheel. I don't know, Ratch, but we'll figure it out. Everything will be fine. She wanted to believe him, but his words sounded like a promise he didn't know if he could keep. The following weeks turned into a series of doctor visits. They were referred to a pediatric neurologist who ran Jake through a series of tests. Rachel sat in the hallway while Michael was in the office with his son, flipping through the magazine, not seeing the words. Her thoughts revolved around one thing. What if we missed something? What if it's our fault? When they left, Michael looked paler than usual. Jake held his hand, but his gaze was fixed on the floor. What did the doctor say? Rachel asked, standing up. He wants more tests, Michael answered, his voice quiet. Says Jake, may be on the spectrum. On the spectrum? She asked, her heart pounding. What does it mean? He's not sure, Michael shrugged, but his eyes avoided hers. He said it could be autism, or something similar. The word autism fell between them like a stone. Rachel felt her legs give way, and she leaned against the wall. Autism? She whispered. But he's our Jake. He's just quiet. I know, Michael said, but his voice was hoarse. Let's not panic. This is just a guess. But panic had already settled in her chest. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat in the living room, looking at pictures of Jake, his first smile, his tiny hands clutching a cube. She remembered how he looked at the leaves in the park, how he loved it when she sang lullabies to him. How could this love, this life, be something that needs to be diagnosed? The final examination was scheduled for November. By this time, Rachel had read everything she could find about autism, and each article left her more confused. Some talked about the gift, others about the problems. She saw stories online of parents who found ways to help their children, and it gave her hope, but the fear still did not go away. Michael, on the other hand, avoided talking about the diagnosis. He spent more time with Jake playing with blocks, pushing him on his shoulders, planting new flowers in the garden. Why don't you want to talk about it? Rachel asked one evening as they washed the dishes. Jake was sleeping in his room, and the silence in the house seemed too heavy. Because I don't want it to be a diagnosis, Michael answered without looking at her. He is our son. I know, her voice broke, but if it's true, we need to know. To help him. Help? He turned, his eyes flashed. What if doctors are wrong? What if they just want a label? Michael, she stepped towards him, her hands shaking. I'm afraid too, but we can't pretend nothing is happening. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I don't want to lose him, he said quietly. We're not losing him, Rachel took his hand, her eyes filled with tears. We love him, and we always will. The day of diagnosis arrived cold and gray. They sat in the office of Dr. Clark, the neurologist who had been caring for Jake for the last few months. She was calm, with a soft voice, but her words cut like a knife. Based on tests and observations, we confirm that Jake is on the autism spectrum, she said, looking at them over her glasses. He has moderate manifestations. He's nonverbal at the moment, but that doesn't mean he won't be able to communicate in other ways. We recommend early intervention speech therapy, behavioral therapy, possibly special programs. Rachel listened, but her mind clung to the word autism. It sounded so final, so alien. She looked at Jake, who was sitting in the corner of the office, sorting out the cubes. He was the same as always her boy, her light. How could he be something that was described in medical terms? What does this mean for him? Michael asked, his voice hoarse. For his future. That means he will need support, Dr. Clark replied. But Jake is a unique child. With the right help, he can achieve a lot. You are already giving him love, and this is the most important thing. Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Will he talk? Will he go to a regular school? Will he be happy? But the words stuck in my throat. Thank you, Michael managed to say as they stood up to leave. No one spoke in the car. Jake looked out the window, his fingers fiddling with the hem of his jacket. Rachel turned to Michael, but his face was stony, his eyes fixed on the road. What are we going to do? She whispered. Everything you need, he answered, but his voice was empty. At home, they tried to return to normal life, but everything changed. Rachel spent hours on the computer, researching programs for children with autism, writing down contact information for therapists. Michael spent his evenings in the garden, digging in the soil, as if he wanted to bury his fears. They barely spoke to each other, not because they were angry, but because words seemed too fragile. One night, Rachel found Michael in the garage. He was sitting on an old chair, holding one of Jake's blocks in his hands. His eyes were red. I thought we were doing everything right, he said without looking at her. I thought we were giving him everything. Rachel sat down next to him, her hand resting on his shoulder. We give, she whispered, and we will give. He's still our Jake. But this is not what we planned, his voice broke. I wanted him to have a simple life. He will have his own life, she said, although her heart was breaking, and we will be with him. Always. Michael nodded but didn't answer. He simply squeezed the cube harder, and Rachel realized that their ideal life, the one they built under the magnolia tree, with dreams of fairy tales and trees, had given the first crack. Not in love, but in their confidence that everything will be easy. Rachel sat in the living room, wrapped in an old blanket. On the table in front of her lay bills for visits to the neurologist, for consultations with a speech therapist, for tests that seemed to never end. Their savings, accumulated over years of frugal living, were dwindling faster than she could have imagined. Michael came in from the street, brushing mud off his shoes. His face was gray with fatigue. His eyes were red. He had just returned from another part-time job, planting trees for a private client. Have you eaten? Rachel asked, looking up. I had a snack in the car, he answered, throwing his jacket on a chair. Is Jake sleeping? Yes, she nodded. I fell asleep with a cube in my hand. Michael smiled faintly, but the smile quickly faded. He sat down opposite, his hands, still rough from the ground, lay on the table. How many more have arrived? He asked. nodding at the bills. Rachel sighed, pushing a stack of papers towards him. 500 for a speech therapist, 300 for a therapist, and that's just last week. He ran his hand over his face as if trying to erase the fatigue. I talked to the boss, he said. They give me more hours. And I also found a part-time job for the weekend landscaping for some cottage community. Michael, her voice was quiet but firm. You're hardly ever at home anyway. What should we do, Ratch? He looked at her, and there was something new in his eyes, not anger, but despair. We need money. For him. She knew he was right, but the words still cut. Michael was already working full-time at his landscaping company and was now taking evening shifts at the nursery and weekends at construction. His hands that had once held her tenderly in the rain at Zilker Park were now calloused, and his shoulders were hunched as if he was carrying the world. She began, but fell silent. What could she say? What's afraid of losing him? What's afraid of their family falling apart while they're drowning in bills and worries? I know, he said, as if he had read her thoughts. But we can handle it. We always managed. Rachel nodded, but her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, like before, when they were young and everything seemed possible. But now their life was different. It was a struggle. Michael began to disappear from home even more often. He left before dawn and returned late, sometimes after midnight. Rachel saw how hard he tried. He brought Jake new blocks, tried to play with him, even if he could barely stand on his feet. But their conversations became shorter and sharper. They no longer sat on the porch watching the sunset. Their world had narrowed to Jake, bills, and endless fatigue. Rachel stopped writing fairy tales. Her notebook, once full of stories about squirrels and sparrows, lay in a drawer, gathering dust. All her time was spent on Jake traveling to therapists, working out at home, trying to understand how he was feeling. He was as bright as before, but his silence became louder. He could sit for hours, arranging the cubes in neat rows, or sway, looking at the light of the lamp. Sometimes he smiled at her, and it was like a ray of sunshine in a storm. But more often he went into his own world, where she could not follow him. Look, Jake, she said one day, showing him a book with bright pictures. This is a fox cub. He loves to run through the forest. Jake glanced at the book, but his eyes quickly returned to the blocks. Rachel lowered her book, feeling her heart clench. She wanted him to talk, to laugh like other children, to call her mom, not only by repeating after her. But he was her Jake, and she loved him for who he was. It's just that sometimes this love was so hard. She tried to be strong for him, for Michael, for herself. But at night, when the house fell asleep, she sat in the dark and cried. She was afraid that she couldn't cope, that she wasn't doing enough, that their family was drowning, and she didn't know how to save it. "Where are you?" she asked Michael one evening when he returned after midnight. His shirt smelled of sweat and earth, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "It worked," he answered briefly, opening the refrigerator. "Is there anything left to eat?" "There's soup in the pan," she said, looking at him. "Michael, we need to talk." He froze, his hand still on the refrigerator door. "About what?" "About us." Her voice trembled. "You're at work all the time. I'm with Jake all the time. We are losing each other." He turned, his face tense. "I'm doing this for us, Ratch." "For him. Do you think I like to work like hell?" "I know." She stood up, her hands shaking. "But I can't do this anymore. I can't be alone in this." "You are not alone," he said, but his voice was harsh. "I'm here." "Where?" She stepped closer, her eyes filled with tears. "In the garage? At a construction site? You don't even ask how I am, Michael." He opened his mouth, but found no words. Then he simply shook his head and went into the bedroom, leaving her in the kitchen. Rachel sank into her chair, feeling tears running down her cheeks. It was not a quarrel, no shouting, no accusations. This was worse. It was the silence that grew between them, like a crack in their once perfect life. The financial crisis hit them like a wave. Insurance only covered part of Jake's therapy, and the new programs his doctors recommended cost more than they could afford. Rachel tried to find a part-time job, But who would hire a woman who could only work a couple of hours a day while Jake was at the special needs daycare? Her blog, which once brought joy, was abandoned. She could not write about motherhood when she felt on the edge every day. One day, while rummaging through a drawer for old receipts, she came across her notebook. She opened it, and her gaze fell on an unfinished fairy tale about a little fox who was looking for his home. Rachel ran her finger over the lines, feeling something inside her breaking. She was no longer the girl who dreamed of writing children's books. She was a mother who fought for her son, a wife who was losing her husband, a woman who was losing herself. "Why don't you write?" Michael asked one evening, catching her with a notepad. He looked exhausted, but his voice was softer than usual. "Because I don't have words," she answered, closing the notebook. "Everything I want to say gets stuck here." She pressed her hand to her chest. He sat down next to her, his shoulder touching her. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said quietly. "And you?" She looked at him. Her eyes were full of pain. "You carry everything alone. Why don't you let me help?" "Because I don't know how," he admitted, and his voice trembled. "I just want him to be happy. To make you happy." Rachel took his hand, feeling her fingers tremble. "We are happy when you are with us," she whispered. "Not somewhere out there, Michael. Here." He nodded but didn't answer. They sat in silence, holding hands, but both knew that this was not enough. Their love was still there, but it was drowning under the weight of bills, fatigue, and fear for Jake. By the spring of 2017, their life had become one of survival. Michael worked 3 jobs. His health began to fail. He coughed in the morning, but brushed it off, saying that it was just a cold. Rachel spent her days with Jake, taking him to therapy, teaching him new signs so he could show what he wanted. Sometimes he looked at her as if he understood everything, and it gave her strength. But more often I felt helpless. One day, when Michael left for another shift, she found a note in his jacket, a list of debts that he kept. The numbers were terrifying. Rachel sat on the floor, clutching the paper, and began to cry. Not because they were poor, but because they were together, but so far from each other. "We can handle it," she whispered, as if persuading herself. But deep down, she wasn't sure. Their treehouse, once full of laughter and dreams, was now filled with silence, and Rachel was afraid that this silence would swallow them all. Rachel Grayson, now 30, sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen of an old laptop. Jake, 5 years old, played in the living room, arranging his blocks into complex patterns that only he understood. Michael was at work as usual, his 3rd shift of the day, and Rachel didn't expect him until midnight. Their life, once full of dreams and ease, was now squeezed into the grip of routine, bills, and silent evenings. But that evening something changed. Rachel had no plans to return to her blog. It gathered dust on the internet for more than a year, abandoned, like her fairy tales, like her dreams of becoming a writer. Once she wrote about squirrels and sparrows, about magical forests, but now her life was far from magic. However, in recent weeks, she had felt the words pooling inside her, like water behind a dam. Fear, fatigue, love for Jake, pain from the distance with Michael, all this required an outlet. She opened the laptop almost automatically and began typing. "I don't know if anyone is reading this," she began, "but I need to talk. My son is the brightest person I know. He sees the world differently, and I am learning to see through his eyes. But it's hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, and no one will throw me a lifeline." She wrote about Jake, the way he smiled when he saw shadows on the wall, the way he froze when the room was too loud. She wrote about herself, about how she was afraid of not coping, how she missed Michael, whom she saw less and less. She didn't expect anyone to read it. It was a cry into the void, a way to relieve the pressure in my chest. When she finished, she titled the post, "My Quiet World," and clicked publish, without really thinking about it. Then she closed her laptop and went to put Jake to bed. "Good night, my boy," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Jake looked at her with his gray eyes, and for a second it seemed to her that he understood everything. She turned off the light and returned to the kitchen, where the silence of the house covered her again. The next morning, Rachel woke up to the sound of a notification on her phone. She reached for it, expecting to see a reminder about the score or a message from the speech therapist. Instead, there were a dozen letters from her blog on the screen. She frowned, opened the mail, and froze. Comments. Dozens of comments under her post. I cried reading this. My son is also on the spectrum, and I feel the same way, wrote a woman named Sarah. Thank you for writing. I thought I was the only one, added another, Lisa. You're not drowning. You float even if you can't see it yourself. This was from Kate, who signed off as mother of two special ones. Rachel scrolled through the messages, her heart pounding. She didn't expect her words, so personal, so raw, to resonate. She opened the blog and saw that the post had received hundreds of views overnight. People shared it in groups for parents, on social networks, in chats. Her voice, which she thought was lost, suddenly sounded. What are you reading? Michael asked, entering the kitchen. He looked exhausted, but his eyes settled on her face as if he noticed something unusual. My blog, she answered, still not looking up from the screen. I wrote yesterday, and people answer. Seriously? He sat down next to him, looking into the screen. How many are there? Hundreds, she said quietly. They write that they feel the same as me. Michael smiled for the first time in a long time. His smile was real. I told you your words were special, he said, squeezing her shoulder. Proud of you, Ratch. She looked at him, feeling the warmth of his hand, and for a second everything was as before they were a team. But then he got up to get ready for work, and reality returned. See you in the evening, he said, kissing the top of her head. Yes, she answered, but her voice was quieter than she wanted. Over the following days, Rachel began to write more often. Not every day, she still didn't have enough time, but when Jake fell asleep or was in therapy, she sat down at her laptop. She talked about small victories. The first time Jake gestured that he wanted water, the way he laughed when she blew on his stomach. She wrote about the difficulties, about how difficult it is to explain to the doctor what her son needs, about how she is afraid that he will never say "Mom" consciously. Her posts were honest, sometimes painfully, and it was this honesty that hooked people. By the end of the summer, her blog, which she once called Tales for the Stars after her childhood stories, had thousands of readers. Women, mostly mothers, but not only left comments, shared their stories, thanked her for giving them a voice. Rachel began receiving letters with questions: how she copes with therapy, how she finds strength, how she supports her husband. She answered everyone, although it took hours. These letters became her lifeline, a reminder that she was not alone. Did you see this? Asked her friend Emma, who came to visit in early September. She showed Rachel a screenshot. Her post had been reposted in a large group for parents of children with autism. You already have 10,000 subscribers. Rachel blinked in disbelief. 10,000. She asked again. This can't be true. It's true, Emma laughed, hugging her. You're doing something important, Ratch. People hear you. Rachel smiled, but something tightened inside her. She was grateful, really grateful for the support, for the fact that her words helped others. But at home, in their little world, nothing has changed. Michael was still working until he was exhausted. Their conversations were limited to discussing bills and Jake's schedule, and she herself felt like she was disappearing into the role of a mother, forgetting who she used to be. How are you? Emma asked, noticing her look. I don't know, Rachel admitted, lowering her eyes. The blog helps, but at home everything is the same. Emma squeezed her hand. You're doing more than you think, she said. And Michael too. You're just in different rhythms now. Rachel nodded, but Emma's words didn't stop the pain. She wanted Michael to read her posts so he could see how she was trying to hold on. But he barely found time to sleep, let alone go online. By October, the blog began to generate a small income. Advertising for children's products, a partnership with a website about parenting, these were crumbs, but they helped pay for part of Jake's therapy. Rachel felt proud, but also guilty. She earned money while staying at home, while Michael was breaking his back working 3 jobs. She tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed it off. That's great, Ratch, he said one day when she showed him a receipt from an advertiser. Well done. But I want you to be home more, she replied, her voice almost pleading. This money, maybe you can take fewer shifts. He looked at her, and a shadow flashed in his eyes. We still don't have enough, he said. You know, she knew. The bills didn't disappear, the treatments didn't get cheaper, and their house needed repairs. The roof was leaking, and the heating was barely working. But she hated that their lives became numbers. I just want us to be together, she whispered. We're together, he answered, but his voice was tired, and he went into the garage, as he always did when the conversation became too difficult. The blog grew, and with it grew the feeling that Rachel was needed by someone outside of their home. She was invited to speak at a local meeting of parents of children with autism. She was nervous, but agreed, thinking about the women who wrote to her that her words gave them strength. The night before the show, she sat with Jake, reading a book to him, although he spent more time looking at the pages than listening. Do you think I can handle it? She asked him, knowing that he would not answer. Jake looked at her, his eyes clear, and he touched her hand. It was a small miracle, his way of saying yes. Rachel smiled, feeling the tears welling up. Thank you, my boy, she whispered. At the meeting, she talked about Jake, about how he teaches her to see the world differently, about how love for him is stronger than all fears. When she finished, the women in the audience applauded, some cried. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, came up to her after. Thank you, she said. I thought I was going crazy. But now I know that I'm not alone. Rachel hugged her, feeling her own heart lighten. For the first time in a long time, she felt important not just as a mother, but as a person whose words carried weight. When she got home, Michael was there a rare evening when he wasn't working. He sat with Jake, helping him build a tower of blocks. How did it go? He asked, looking up. Okay, she answered, smiling. People listened. They understood. I knew you'd hook them, he said, his voice soft. I always knew how to talk. She wanted to tell him everything about the women who cried, about how her heart beat with fear and pride. But he looked so tired that she just sat down next to him and took his hand. Tell me about your day, she said. He shrugged his shoulders, but began to talk about a new project at the nursery, about how he planted maples. It was a small moment, but it reminded her of how they once shared everything. The blog became her rock, but she knew her true strength lay in their family. Rachel Grayson, now 30, sat at the dimly lit kitchen table, checking email on her laptop. Jake, 5 years old, slept in his room, surrounded by the blocks he loved so much. Michael was at work, as always, his third shift of the day, and Rachel was already used to the emptiness of the house in the evenings. Their life, once full of shared dinners and laughter, was now divided into two parallel realities: her world coming to life on the internet, and his drowning in earth, fatigue, and silence. Rachel's blog, Tales for the Stars, is no longer just a personal diary. In a few months, he grew from a cry into the void into a community that united thousands of parents, mostly mothers, whose children, like Jake, lived in their own special world. Her posts, honest, full of love and pain, resonated with those who felt alone in their struggle. She wrote about small victories, the first time Jake showed he wanted a hug, or how he laughed when she blew bubbles. She wrote about her fear that he would never say, I love you, her heartbreak when she couldn't understand how he felt. Each word was like a bridge connecting her to others. By the spring of 2018, the blog had more than 30,000 subscribers. Rachel received dozens of letters a day from women who thanked her for her honesty, from fathers who asked how to support their wives, from therapists who offered to collaborate. She answered everyone, even if it meant staying up half the night. These letters became her fuel, her way of remembering that she was more than just a mother drowning in routine. Did you see this? Asked Emma, her friend, who stopped by in March with a bottle of wine and news. She showed Rachel an article in a local online magazine. The headline read, Austin Mom Changes Lives Through Blog About Son with Autism. Rachel blinked in disbelief. Is this about me? She whispered, skimming the text with her eyes. The journalist described her blog as a voice of hope, quoted her posts, and told how Rachel inspires thousands of parents. At the end of the article, there was a call: share this story so that more people can learn about her work. Of course, about you. Emma laughed, pouring wine into mugs because there were no glasses left in the house. You're a star, Ratch. You'll be on a talk show soon. Don't talk nonsense, Rachel shook her head, but her cheeks turned pink. She was not used to attention, but she could not deny that this feeling to be heard, to be needed, filled her with a warmth that she had not experienced for a long time. I'm serious, Emma said, raising her mug. You're doing something big. For you. Rachel smiled as she clinked her glass, but her mind was elsewhere. She wanted Michael to be here, so he could see this article, so he could understand how much it meant. But he was on another shift, and she knew that even if she showed him the article, he would simply nod and say, "Well done, Ratch," before going to bed. Media attention grew like a snowball. After the article in a local magazine, 2 more blogs were written about Rachel, dedicated to raising children with special needs. Then she was invited to a podcast, small but popular among parents. She agreed, although her heart was pounding with fear. The recording took place via video link, and Rachel sat in her bedroom while Jake was in therapy and Michael was at work. "Tell me what inspired you to start a blog," asked the host, a woman with a warm voice named Laura. Rachel hesitated, looking at her reflection in the corner of the screen. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and there were shadows under her eyes, but she took a deep breath and spoke. "I started writing because I felt lonely," she admitted. "My son, Jake, he is special, and I didn't know how to deal with it. The blog became my way to speak out, but then I realized that it helps not only me, it helps others feel like they are not alone." Laura nodded, her eyes sparkling. "You give people hope, Rachel. This is incredible." Rachel smiled, but her throat tightened. She wanted to believe that she gave hope, but at home, in their small world, hope was a rare guest. The podcast received thousands of plays, and her blog gained even more subscribers. She was invited to conferences, asked to speak at parent meetings, and even offered to write a column for a website about parenting. Rachel agreed to almost everything, not for the sake of fame, but because every time she spoke, she felt alive. "You're a celebrity now," Marge's neighbor told her when she met her at the mailbox. "I saw you on that podcast. You're doing great, girl." "Thank you," Rachel replied, smiling shyly. "I just do what I can." But inside, she felt different. For the first time in years, she was not only Jake's mom, not only the wife of Michael, who disappeared at work. She was Rachel, a woman whose words changed lives. This feeling of significance, like a breath of air after a long dive, filled her with strength. Michael, meanwhile, lived at his own pace. His 3 jobs at a landscaping company, a nursery, and a construction job left him little time even to sleep. He returned home after midnight, his hands covered with new calluses and his eyes empty. Rachel saw how hard he tried. He brought Jake wooden figures that he carved in the garage, read to him before bed, even if his voice trembled from fatigue. But their conversations became shorter and colder. "Have you heard the podcast?" she asked one evening as he ate the cold soup she had left on the stove. "Not yet," he answered without looking up. "But I'm happy for you, Ratch." "Is it true?" "You could listen," she said, trying to hide her disappointment. "This is important to me." "I know," he sighed, pushing the plate away. "It's just, there's no time. You see how everything is." "I see," her voice became sharper than she intended. "But I try too, Michael. I don't just sit at home." "I didn't say that," he looked at her, his eyebrows furrowed. "But I work so we can pay for therapy, so that Jake has everything." "Am I not doing anything?" She crossed her arms, feeling the resentment growing. "The blog brings in money, you know. Not much, but enough that you might want to take the day off." Michael shook his head, his jaw tense. "We still don't have enough," he said. "You know." "I know," she turned away, her eyes burning with tears. "But I want you here, not just for Jake, for me." He didn't answer. She just got up, went into the bedroom, and a minute later she heard the bed creaking. Rachel remained in the kitchen, looking at her laptop, where the notification of a new comment on her post was flashing. "You inspire me every day," wrote a woman named Anna. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling her heart torn between gratitude to the world and the emptiness of home. By the summer of 2018, the blog had become her second home. Rachel has spoken at 2 parenting conferences in Austin and Dallas. She stood in front of hundreds of people talking about Jake, how he taught her to see beauty in the little things, how loving him was stronger than all the difficulties. The audience applauded, the women hugged her afterwards and shared their stories. She felt needed, important, as if her voice had finally found its place. But at home, everything was different. Michael hardly asked about her performances. He nodded as she talked, but his thoughts were elsewhere, in bills, in projects, in the fatigue that had eaten into his bones. Rachel, on the contrary, spoke more and more in public, on the internet, in letters to readers. But with Michael, her words became less frequent, shorter, as if she was afraid that they would be broken by his silence. "Will you be home on Saturday?" she asked once when he was getting ready for his next shift. "I don't know," he answered, tying his shoes. "Depends on the schedule." "I speak in the center," she said, her voice quiet. "I wanted you to come." He looked at her, and for a second she thought he would agree. But then he shook his head. "I'll try," he said, "but I don't promise." Rachel nodded, feeling something inside her break. She didn't want to fight, she didn't want to yell or blame. But the distance between them grew, like a shadow that they both saw but did not know how to stop. The night before the talk, Rachel sat with Jake, showing him photos from the last conference. "You see, my boy," she said, stroking his head, "Mom tells people how special you are." Jake looked at her, his eyes clear, and he touched her cheek. This was his "I hear you," and Rachel smiled, feeling the tears. She wanted Michael to see this, their son, her struggle, her love. But he was out there somewhere, among the trees and construction sites, and she didn't know how to bring him home. The next day she spoke to a full audience. Her voice trembled, but the words flowed easily about Jake, about hope, about how important it is to hold on. People applauded, some cried, some thanked. Rachel felt in her place, but as she returned home, she looked for Michael in the crowd. He wasn't there. Michael returned home later than usual, his shoes leaving tracks of mud on the porch. He looked like a man whom life had squeezed to the last drop. His shoulders were hunched. His eyes were dull. Rachel looked up as he entered. "You missed the meeting at Jake's school," she said, her voice even but bitter. Michael froze as he took off his jacket. "What meeting?" he asked, frowning. "Today at 5, she crossed her arms. "I reminded you. Twice." He ran his hand over his face, his jaw tense. "Ratch, I was at a construction site. The client detained me. I couldn't leave." "You can never leave." Her voice became sharper. "It was important, Michael." They discussed the program for Jake, his progress, his future. "I know what's important." He stepped towards the table, his eyes flashing. "I work every day so that he has this future." "Where have you been?" "At the next meeting for your blog." Rachel felt her cheeks heat up. She stood up, her hands shaking. "My blog pays for half of his therapies," she said, her voice trembling with resentment. "And I was there, Michael. I'm always there when it comes to Jake. And you don't even know that he learned to show thank you this week. Because I don't sit at home like you." He barked, and his words hung in the air like a blow. Rachel froze, her eyes filling with tears. Michael stopped short, and his face softened. "Ratch, that's not what I wanted." "No, you said what you think." She shook her head, her voice becoming cold. "You think I'm selfish because I write, because I perform, and I do this for us, for him." "What am I doing?" He stepped closer, his voice was hoarse. "I'm breaking my back doing 3 jobs so we don't drown in debt." "And you live in your own world, Rachel. Conferences, podcasts, ovations. Do you even notice what's happening here?" "I notice." She looked into his eyes, her tears finally breaking through. "I notice that you are indifferent. You don't even try to be with us." "Indifferent?" He almost shouted. but then lowered his voice, remembering Jake. I do everything to make you happy, and you only think about yourself. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck. She turned and went into the bedroom, closing the door. Michael remained in the kitchen, his fists clenched, but he did not follow her. For the first time, their quarrel did not end with hugs or promises to fix everything. For the first time, silence fell between them thick, heavy, like fog. The following days were cold, despite the warm autumn. Rachel and Michael talked only about what was necessary. Jake's schedule, bills, who would pick up the groceries. Rachel felt broken. Michael's words about her selfishness cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She loved Jacob more than life itself. She fought for him every day, but somewhere deep down she wondered, was he right? Was she too caught up in the blog, the performances, the feeling of importance that other people's applause gave her? Michael, for his part, remained silent. He left for work even earlier and returned even later. Rachel saw the way he looked at Jake with love, but also with pain, as if he blamed himself for not being able to give him more. She wanted to come up, hug him, tell him that they would cope, as always. But every time she tried, his tired gaze stopped her. Their love was still there, but it was buried in resentment and misunderstanding. At the end of October, Rachel received a letter that changed her mood. She was invited to speak at TEDx in San Diego in March 2019. The theme is The Power of Vulnerability. Her blog, her story with Jake, her voice became loud enough to get noticed. She reread the letter 3 times, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and pride. Michael, she said that evening as he ate a cold sandwich at the sink. I was invited to TEDx in San Diego. He looked up, his eyebrows raised. That's cool, he said, but his voice was flat. When? March, she swallowed, feeling her palms sweat. I want you to come with me. He put the sandwich down, his face becoming serious. Ratch, you know how it is with work, he said. I can't just pick it up and fly away. This is one weekend. Her voice became quieter, almost pleading. This is important to me. For us. For us? He looked at her, and bitterness flashed in his eyes. Or for your career. Rachel felt her heart clench. This is not a career, she said, trying not to break down. This is what keeps me afloat. Do you even understand how hard it is for me? Is it easy for me? He stepped closer. His voice was hoarse. I haven't slept well for a year, Rachel. I'm doing everything I can to make sure Jake is okay. And you fly to California to talk about how we live. I'm talking about hope, her eyes filled with tears, about how much we love him, how we fight. Then why don't I feel it? He asked, and his words hung in the air. Rachel didn't answer. She turned and walked into the living room, leaving him alone. He did not follow her, and this silence became another wall between them. Preparation for TEDx took the following months. Rachel wrote the speech at night when Jake was asleep and Michael was at work. She wanted to talk about Jake, how his silence had taught her to listen, how his peace had shown her that love didn't need words. But the more she wrote, the more afraid she felt. What if she fails? What if her voice falters in front of hundreds of people? What if she can't convey how much she loves her son? Are you ready? Emma asked over the phone in February, when Rachel admitted she wasn't sleeping because of her nerves. No, she replied, fiddling with her pen over the draft of her speech. I'm afraid that I'll forget everything I wanted to say. You won't forget, Emma said, because it is your truth. You live it every day. Rachel smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. I just want it to be perfect. It will be yours, Emma replied, and that's enough. Pride grew in Rachel every day. She imagined how she stood on stage, how her words reached their hearts, how people in the audience saw Jake through her eyes, not as a diagnosis, but as a bright boy who changed her life. But this pride was mixed with loneliness. She wanted to share this moment with Michael, but he was further away than ever. Are you sure you won't go? She asked a week before the trip as they sat at dinner, a rare evening when he was home. I can't, Ratch, he said, looking at his plate. I have a project for the weekend. If I refuse, they will find someone else. It's always work, right? Her voice was quiet, but full of pain. What should I do? He looked up. His eyes were tired. Someone has to keep us afloat. Rachel nodded, but her heart hurt. She wanted to shout that she needed not just a breadwinner, but a husband, a partner, a person who would be there. But she remained silent, afraid that her words would only deepen the rift between them. The night before she left, Rachel sat with Jake, reading him a book about the stars. He looked at the pictures, his fingers fiddling with the edge of the page. She stroked his hair, feeling her fear and pride fighting inside. "I will do this for you, my boy," she whispered, "so that people know how special you are." Jake looked at her, his eyes clear, and he touched her hand. It was his "I'm with you," and Rachel felt the tears welling up. She hugged him, inhaling the smell of his shampoo, and thought that for his sake she would go through any fear. Michael returned late while she was packing her suitcase. He stood in the bedroom doorway, looking at her. "Good luck," he said, his voice soft but distant. "Thank you," she replied without looking up. He nodded and went into the living room. Rachel closed the suitcase, feeling the silence between them grow louder than any words. Their first silence after the quarrel did not end, it grew, and she did not know how to stop it. Rachel sat in her bedroom, surrounded by papers containing drafts of her speech. Her laptop was open to a page of videos of other TEDx talks. She watched them for hours, trying to figure out how to hold herself on stage, how not to lose her voice, how not to let down those who would listen. Her speech, entitled "Vulnerability as Strength," was about Jake, how his silence taught her to be louder, how his world showed her that love doesn't require words. She rewrote the text dozens of times, crossing out unnecessary things, adding details, afraid that she would not be able to convey the full depth of their story. "This is too long," she muttered one night, sitting with a cup of cold tea. She crossed out the paragraph about her fears, but immediately returned it. "No, this is important. They should know." Jake was sleeping in the next room, his six-pack lying in perfect order by the bed. Rachel looked at him, her heart swelled with love. She knew she was performing for him so that the world would see him not as the kid with autism, but as a boy who loved shadows and blocks and her voice when she sang. But fear was a constant companion. What if she forgets the words? What if her voice wavers? What if the people in the room don't understand? She imagined hundreds of eyes looking at her, and her palms began to sweat. She called Emma almost every day, looking for support. "I don't know why I agreed," she admitted a month before the event, her voice trembling. "I'm not a speaker, Emma. I'm just a mom." "You are more than a mother," Emma answered firmly. "You are a voice for thousands of people, and you will tell your story like no one else." "What if I fail?" Rachel whispered. "You won't fail," Emma said, "because you are telling the truth, and Jake will be with you in every word." These words became her mantra. Rachel repeated them when she practiced in front of the mirror, when she recorded herself on her phone so she could hear where her voice sounded unsure. She wanted her speech to be perfect, not for fame, but for Jake, for all the parents who, like her, struggled every day. Pride began to break through the fear. When Rachel looked at her notes, at the letters from readers who thanked her for her blog, she felt like she was doing something big. Her story, their story, could change someone's perception, give someone hope. She imagined herself standing on stage, how her words reached hearts, and it filled her with warmth. She wasn't just Rachel Grayson, a wife and mother. She was a woman whose voice was heard. But at home, pride was mixed with pain. Michael, absorbed in his work, hardly spoke about her performance. She showed him a draft of the speech one evening, hoping he would read it. "This is great, Ratch," he said, skimming the first page. "Well done. Have you finished reading?" she asked, feeling a pang of disappointment. "I'm tired." He put the sheets of paper on the table. "But I know that you will do it better than anyone." His words were kind, but empty. Rachel wanted him to feel how much this meant to her, to share her excitement. But he was somewhere far away in his own world of land and bills. "Are you really not going?" she asked a week before leaving, when they had dinner, a rare moment when he was at home. "I can't," he answered, looking at his plate. "I have a project. If I refuse, we will be taken off the schedule." "One weekend, Michael." Her voice was quiet, but full of pain. "This is important." "I know," he looked up, his eyes tired, "but I can't give up everything. You understand." Rachel nodded, but her throat tightened. She understood his work kept them afloat, paid for Jake's therapy, fixed their leaking roof. But she wanted him to understand her, so that he would be there when she steps on stage, when her voice first sounds so loud. The day before the flight, Rachel sat with Jake, showing him the stars through the window. He looked at the sky, his fingers fiddling with her sleeve. She stroked his hair, feeling fear and pride fighting inside. "I will do this for you, my boy," she whispered, "so that the world knows what you are like." Jake touched her cheek, his eyes were clear, and that was all she needed. She hugged him, inhaling his scent, and thought that for his sake she would cope with any fear. Michael returned late while she was packing her suitcase. He stopped in the doorway, looking at her. "You'll be great," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you," she replied, but her smile was forced. He nodded and went into the living room. Rachel closed her suitcase, feeling their silence grow louder. She flew to San Diego alone, with a speech full of love and a heart full of longing for what they were losing. The hotel where the speakers were staying was more luxurious than anything Rachel was used to. The marble hall, soft carpets, panoramic windows overlooking the ocean. It was a different world, far from their house with a leaking roof and a creaky porch. She went to her room, feeling out of place. A suitcase filled with modest clothes looked alien against the background of a snow-white bedspread. Rachel glanced in the mirror. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a neat bun, but there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She sighed, repeating to herself the lines of the speech that she knew by heart. The performance went better than she expected. When she walked on stage, her knees were shaking, but as soon as she started talking about Jake, about his light, about how his silence taught her to be stronger, the fear receded. The audience listened with bated breath, and when she finished, applause covered her like a wave. Rachel smiled, feeling tears sting her eyes. She did it. For Jake, for herself, for everyone who saw their story in her words. After the performance, there was a reception in the hotel banquet hall. The tables were laden with snacks, waiters were passing glasses of champagne, and the air was full of laughter and conversation. Rachel, still in the simple black dress she had chosen for the stage, held her glass but didn't drink much. She felt both on top and lost. People came up, thanked her, praised her speech, and every compliment was like a spark that ignited warmth in her chest. But she was looking for someone who wasn't their Michael. "Rachel, that was amazing," said a voice nearby. She turned to see Alan Cross, the therapist who was speaking at the same session. He was about 40, with light gray in his dark hair and a smile that seemed too light for the seriousness of his work. He spoke about sensory integration in children with autism, and Rachel remembered how his confident voice filled the room. "Thank you," she replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "Your speech was also inspiring." "Oh, I was just quoting studies." He waved his hand, but his eyes lingered on her. "And you told the story. This is different. It's catchy." Rachel smiled, looking away. She was not used to such compliments, not from strangers, not with such directness. She thought about Michael, how he had called her "my muse" in their early years, but now his words were few and far between, muffled by fatigue. They started talking. Alan was an easy conversationalist, he joked, told stories about his patients, asked about Jake. Rachel felt the tension of the day lift. Champagne, the second glass, made her thoughts softer, and his compliments, "You are incredibly strong. Your passion is contagious," fell on her heart like rain on parched land. She didn't notice how time was slipping away, how the hall was thinning out, how their conversation was becoming quieter, closer. "Shall we go to the bar?" Alan suggested when the reception began to die down. "It's more comfortable there than among these waiters." Rachel hesitated. Her mind whispered that it was time to go to her room, that there was an early flight tomorrow, that she should call Michael. But her heart, tired of loneliness, wanted a little more of this warmth, this lightness. "Okay," she said, almost surprised by her own voice. The hotel bar was dark, with soft sofas and muffled music. They sat by the window, looking at the lights of the city, and talked about life, about children, about how hard it is to be someone who always has to be strong. Alan ordered more wine, and Rachel didn't refuse. His words, his gaze, his light touch of her hand when he emphasized a thought were like a melody that she had not heard for a long time. She thought about Michael, about his calloused hands, about his silence, about how he had not been there today, and her chest tightened in pain. "You're special, Rachel," Alan said, leaning closer. His voice was low, almost intimate. "Not everyone can open up to the world like that." She looked at him, her thoughts clouded by wine and fatigue. Her mind screamed, "Stop," but her body, starved for attention, was drawn to this moment. She didn't remember who first suggested going up to the room, he or she, but when they were in the elevator, her heart was pounding not from fear, but from something else that she did not want to name. Everything in his room was fast and quiet. No big words, no promises. She didn't think about love, it wasn't love. It was a weakness, a moment when she allowed herself to forget who she was. When it was all over, she lay in the dark, looking at the ceiling, her chest tight with shame. "What have I done?" her mind whispered, but there was no answer. "Are you okay?" Alan asked, his voice soft but distant. "Yes," she lied, standing up. "I need to go." She went to her room without looking back. In the bathroom mirror, she saw her face pale, with smeared mascara. She turned on the shower and stood under the hot water until her skin turned red, but the feeling of dirt did not go away. She thought about Jake, about his bright eyes, about Michael, about how he planted trees for their family. Tears mixed with the water, and Rachel promised herself that it would never happen again. It was a mistake. Moment. Nothing more. Rachel returned to Austin in mid-March, when the city was filled with cherry blossoms. The plane landed in the afternoon, and she rode home in a taxi, looking out the window but not seeing the streets. Her suitcase lay nearby, her speech now spoken folded in a notebook, but all she could think about was the night in San Diego. She felt like a stranger in her body, as if someone else had done what she had done. But she repeated to herself, "It doesn't mean anything. It won't change us." She wanted to believe that she could lock that night in a memory box and never open it. The house greeted her with a familiar routine. Michael was in the yard, digging around the pear tree he planted for Jake. Jake sat on the porch, fiddling with the blocks, his face lighting up when he saw her. Rachel sank down next to him, hugging him so tightly that he made a little noise, his way of saying "Mom." "I missed you, my boy," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. His smell shampoo and something elusively childish was like an anchor, bringing her back to reality. Michael walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. His face was tired, but he smiled. "How did it go?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "Okay," she answered, trying to keep her voice even. People. People listened. "I knew you would win them over," he said, and his voice was sincere but distant, as always lately. Rachel nodded, feeling her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him everything about the scene, about the applause, about how her heart beat when she talked about Jake. But instead, she remained silent, afraid that her voice would reveal more than necessary. Michael didn't notice anything. He did not see how her hands trembled, how she avoided his gaze. He simply patted Jake on the head and went into the house to prepare dinner. Life returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Rachel took Jake to therapy, answered letters from readers, and wrote new blog posts. Her voice online was just as warm and inspiring, but at home she was quieter than before. She cooked breakfast, helped Jake build his towers, smiled at Michael when he returned from work. But every time he touched her a light hug, a hand on her shoulder, she felt a pang of guilt, like a needle under the skin. Michael lived his life. He left before dawn, returned after midnight. His hands smelled of earth, and his eyes smelled of fatigue. He didn't ask about San Diego and didn't notice her silence. Their conversations were short, about bills, about Jake's schedule, about fixing the faucet. Rachel was grateful for this routine. It helped her pretend that everything was okay. But at night, when Michael slept and Jake snored in his room, she lay awake, looking at the ceiling. Her mind went back to that night, to the wine she couldn't wash away. She promised herself that Michael would never find out. This was her burden, her secret, and she would bear it alone. "Are you okay?" Michael asked one day at dinner, looking at her plates of pasta. "Yes," she lied, smiling. "I'm just tired." He nodded without asking questions, and Rachel felt relief and pain at the same time. They lived as if nothing had happened, but she knew that something had changed not in him, but in her. Their house among the trees still stood, but its walls kept her secret, and Rachel was afraid that one day they would collapse. April 2019 in Austin was warm, with magnolia trees in bloom and a light wind that couldn't dispel the heaviness in the Grayson cabin. Rachel, 31, sat at the kitchen table, flipping through notes for a new blog post. Her laptop flashed notifications, but she hesitated to respond after San Diego. Her words seemed false, as if she was hiding the truth about herself behind them. Michael, 34, was at home, which was rare. His day off was spent in the yard, mending a fence near a pear tree. Jake, 7 years old, played in the living room, arranging blocks into complex patterns, his world remaining bright despite the shadows that grew between his parents. Rachel tried to live as before. A month had passed since that night in San Diego, and she had locked her mistake away in the back of her mind, telling herself it didn't mean anything. She deleted the correspondence with Alan Cross, blocked his number, but every time she picked up the phone, her heart sank with fear. Michael, absorbed in his work, did not notice her stress. His days were filled with land, sweat, and bills. Their conversations were short, about Jake's therapies, about what to buy at the store. Rachel clung to this routine, hoping her secret would stay buried. But Alan didn't disappear. That day, while Rachel was preparing lunch, her phone, lying on the table, lit up with a new message. She didn't see she was busy chopping vegetables. Michael walked into the kitchen to get some water, and his eyes fell on the screen. The message was short but clear. "Rachel, I'm in Austin for a conference. I want to talk. Alan." Michael froze. His hand, still damp from working in the yard, clutched the glass. He looked at Rachel, who was standing at the stove, humming something to Jake. Her face was calm, but Michael felt his chest tighten. He knew who Alan was. Rachel had referred to him as the TEDx therapist, but the name sounded different when it popped up in the solitude of her phone. "Ratch," he said, his voice low but firm. "Who is Alan?" Rachel turned, her knife hovering over the carrots. She saw the phone in his hand, the screen still glowing, and her face turned pale. Her mind was spinning, looking for excuses, but the truth was too close. "This is a colleague," she squeezed out, her voice trembling. "From the conference, I told you." Michael looked at her, his eyes narrowed. He slowly put the phone on the table, but did not look away. "He's in Austin," he said, his voice cold. "I want to talk." "What about, Rachel?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to lie, say that it was nothing, but his look not evil, but piercing. It deprived her of words. "It's just work," she muttered, but her voice betrayed her. "It's probably about the blog." Michael nodded, but his jaw tensed. He didn't believe it. She saw it in his eyes, in the way he turned away to pour water. He said nothing more, but the silence between them became heavier than ever. The next day, Sunday, the sky over Austin was filled with clouds promising rain. Rachel woke up feeling like her life was teetering on the edge. Michael was already in the yard, digging around the apple tree, as if he wanted to hide in the ground. Jake sat in his room, his cubes in perfect order, but he was quieter than usual, as if he could feel the storm. Rachel tried to keep herself busy laundry, cooking, answering letters, but her thoughts returned to the phone, to the message, to Michael's gaze. She knew she couldn't remain silent any longer. Michael deserved the truth, even if it ruined everything. She waited for Jake to go play and found Michael in the garden, his hands dirty, his face tense. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. He straightened up. wiping his hands on his jeans, and looked at her. His eyes were empty, as if he already knew what he would hear. "Speak," he said quietly. Rachel swallowed, her tears coming before her words. "In San Diego. I made a mistake," she began, her voice hoarse. I was with Alan. Once. I drank. I was lonely. I hate myself for it. It didn't mean anything, Michael. I swear." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she trembled, waiting for his reaction. She was ready to scream, to be angry, but Michael just looked at her, his face motionless. His silence was worse than any blow. "Please say something," she begged, her voice breaking. "I know I'm to blame. I will do everything to fix this. I love you. I love Jake." He nodded slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then he turned and walked towards the garage without saying a word. Rachel stepped behind him, her heart pounding. "Michael," she shouted, her voice shaking. "Don't go. Please." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "I need to think," he said, his voice as cold as stone. The garage door closed behind him and Rachel was left alone, her sobs echoing in the garden. She collapsed on the porch, covering her mouth with her hand. She waited for pain, waited for his anger, but his silence was an emptiness in which their love seemed to dissolve. She knew she deserved it, but that didn't make it any easier. Rachel had tried to talk to him after that day in the garden. She asked how his work was and offered to make his favorite pie, but he answered briefly, without warmth. "Do you want me to make meatloaf?" she asked one day, standing at the stove. "No need," he replied, looking at the phone. "I'm not hungry." She nodded, feeling her heart clench. She wanted to beg him to forgive, but his silence was a wall that she could not break through. She blamed herself for that night, for letting their love drown in weariness, for not stopping when she could have. Jake, their 7-year-old son, sensed a change. His behavior worsened, he swayed more often, his cubes fell, as if his world was collapsing along with theirs. Sometimes he would scream, his hands pounding the table, his eyes searching for something Rachel couldn't give. She took him to a therapist, but even the specialist, usually full of ideas, seemed worried. "He reacts to stress," she said. "Children with autism. They feel everything. You need to find a way to be together." Rachel nodded, but her throat tightened. Together, they barely looked at each other. She tried to be everything for Jake, a mother, a comfort, a support, but her strength was fading. Michael played with him, patiently built towers, but even these moments were poisoned by their alienation. "I'm sorry, my boy," she whispered at night, sitting by his bed when he fell asleep after a long day. "We're trying." Michael was like a ghost. He didn't accuse, didn't shout, but his silence was his answer. Rachel saw the pain in his eyes when he looked at Jake and knew he blamed himself just as much as she blamed herself. But he didn't share it, didn't give her a chance to help. One day she found him in the garage, sitting with the wooden bird he had carved for Jake. His eyes were red, but his face was motionless. "We need to do something," she said, her voice shaking. "For him. He's not okay." Michael nodded but didn't look at her. "I know," he said quietly, "but I don't know what." Rachel wanted to hug him, but stopped. Their home was full of love for Jake, but they didn't know how to bring it back to each other. They were strangers in the same house, and no one knew what to do now. After Michael found out about her infidelity in April, their lives became a shadow. They lived under the same roof, but were further apart than ever. Rachel couldn't stand the silence any longer. She was waiting for him in the evening when he returned from the garage, his hands smelling of wood and varnish. Jake was already asleep, and the house was too quiet to hide her trembling voice. "Michael," she began, her eyes searching for him, but he was looking at the floor. "We can't continue like this. It's killing us." "And Jake?" He nodded, his face motionless, but his shoulders tense. "I know," he said quietly. Rachel swallowed, her heart pounding. "I want to work on us," she said, her voice full of hope and fear. "I know I'm to blame, but I love you. I want to fix this. We can go to a therapist, we can." "Ratch," he interrupted her, looking up for the first time in weeks. His eyes were tired, but there was no anger in them, only pain. I don't know how to fix this. She froze, her tears welling up. You, don't you want to try? She whispered. Michael ran his hand over his face, his voice becoming quieter. I'm not saying I don't want to, he said, but I can't live like this. I look at you and all I see is what happened in San Diego. I need time. We need a break. Pause. Her voice broke. What does it mean? I'll stay with Tom, he said, referring to his older brother, who lived an hour away. A week, maybe more. To understand what's next. Rachel felt her world crumble. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but his words were so final, so calm, that she only nodded. And Jake? She asked, her voice trembling. He'll stay here, Michael said. I will come every day. He shouldn't feel like he's losing us. She nodded again, her tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael stood up, took a bag from the closet, and began to collect things: shirts, jeans, a toothbrush. Every sound of lightning was like a strike. Rachel watched him walk away to the car and couldn't believe that their love, their home, their life had come to this. I love you, she whispered when he opened the door. He froze, but didn't turn around. June 2019 in Austin was hot, with a scorching sun that could not warm the cold that settled in the Grayson house. Rachel, 31, sat at the kitchen table, her fingers fiddling with the rim of a mug of cold tea. Michael, 34, was in the garage, where he spent more and more time avoiding her gaze. Jake, 7, was playing in his room, but his blocks were falling more often, reflecting the chaos he felt. After Michael found out about her infidelity in April, their lives became a shadow. They lived under the same roof, but were further apart than ever. Rachel couldn't stand the silence any longer. She was waiting for him in the evening when he returned from the garage, his hands smelling of wood and varnish. Jake was already asleep, and the house was too quiet to hide her trembling voice. Michael, she began, her eyes searching for him, but he was looking at the floor. We can't continue like this. It's killing us. And Jake? He nodded, his face motionless, but his shoulders tense. I know, he said quietly. Rachel swallowed, her heart pounding. I want to work on us, she said, her voice full of hope and fear. I know I'm to blame, but I love you. I want to fix this. We can go to a therapist. We can. Ratch, he interrupted her, looking up for the first time in weeks. His eyes were tired, but there was no anger in them, only pain. I don't know how to fix this. She froze, her tears welling up. Don't you want to try? She whispered. Michael ran his hand over his face, his voice becoming quieter. I'm not saying I don't want to, he said, but I can't live like this. I look at you and all I see is what happened in San Diego. I need time. We need a break. Pause. Her voice broke. What does it mean? I'll stay with Tom, he said, referring to his older brother who lived an hour away. A week, maybe more, to understand what's next. Rachel felt her world crumble. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but his words were so final, so calm, that she only nodded. And Jake? She asked, her voice trembling. He'll stay here, Michael said. I will come every day. He shouldn't feel like he's losing us. She nodded again, her tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael stood up, took a bag from the closet, and began to collect things: shirts, jeans, a toothbrush. Every sound of lightning was like a strike. Rachel watched him walk away to the car and couldn't believe that their love, their home, their life had come to this. I love you, she whispered when he opened the door. He froze, but didn't turn around. I know, he said and left. A week after moving in, Michael returned home to spend the day with Jake. July 2019 was milder, with a light wind that stirred the leaves of the apple tree in the yard. Michael, sitting on the porch, watched as Jake, age 7, sorted through the pebbles, arranging them in neat rows. Rachel left for a meeting with Jake's therapist, leaving them alone. Michael felt a heaviness in his chest, not just because of the breakup with Rachel, but because of Jake, who was becoming increasingly restless, as if his world was cracking along with theirs. Michael knelt down next to his son, his knee touching the grass. Hey, kid, he said softly. Can I sit with you? Jake looked at him, his gray eyes clear but wary. He nodded, his fingers continuing to fiddle with the stone. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the words he had been holding in for so long rush out. "You know," he began, his voice quiet, "sometimes adults make mistakes. Big mistakes, and it hurts those they love." Jake didn't answer, but his hands froze as if he were listening. Michael swallowed, his throat tightening. "I love you, Jake," he said, "and Mom loves you. But she and I can't be together now like we used to, and it's not your fault. Never think that it's because of you." Jake looked at him, his eyes deep, as if he saw more than he could say. Michael felt the tears welling up, but held back. Jake slowly handed him the pebble smooth, warm from the sun. Michael took it, his fingers trembling. It was more than a gesture, it was a response, his way of saying, "I hear." Michael smiled, his heart sank with love and great. "You're my best boyfriend," he whispered, placing his hand on Jake's shoulder. "And I will always be there." Jake returned to his pebbles, but his shoulders relaxed. Rachel sat in her bedroom, her laptop closed and a piece of paper in front of her. Her blog was still alive, but she couldn't write for the public. Her words had become too personal, too heavy. Michael still lived with his brother, visiting Jake every day, but their conversations were short, businesslike. Rachel felt like their story was coming to an end, and she couldn't leave without saying everything. She took the pen, her hand trembling. It was like in their youth, when she and Michael wrote letters to each other, full of dreams and love. But this letter was different: confession, repentance, farewell. "Michael," she began, her handwriting uneven. "I don't know if you'll read this, but I have to write. I broke us. I know that my mistake in San Diego is not the only reason, but it was the crack that we could not close. I hate myself for this, not for losing you, although that tears me up, but for making you feel less than you are. You were my home. Your trees, your hands, your voice, all this was my world. I don't know when I started losing it, but I know I didn't fight hard enough. I want you to know that I loved you with every part of me, even when I couldn't show it. And I love Jake, he is our light, and always will be. I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it, but I ask you to live for yourself for him. You deserve to be happy, Michael, and I hope that one day you will find him, even if it is without me. Rachel." She folded the letter, her tears dripping onto the paper. She didn't know if she would give it away, but writing was necessary as a way to let go, as a way to say what she couldn't say out loud. She placed the letter in the drawer, next to the old sketches of fairy tales, and closed it, feeling like a part of her heart remained there. October 2019, the rains have gone, leaving Austin in the gold of autumn leaves. Rachel and Michael sat in the lawyer's office, signing the papers that officially ended their marriage. The room was small, smelling of coffee and paper, but it seemed huge because of the silence between them. Jake was with Emma, their friend, and Rachel was grateful that he couldn't see it. The lawyer, a soft-spoken older woman, explained the terms. Jake would live with Michael, but Rachel could see him every week, take him away on weekends, and be a part of his life. They divided the property. The house remained with Michael. Rachel found a small apartment in the city. No arguing, no shouting. Everything was calm, but this calm cut deeper than the quarrels. "If everything is clear, sign here," the lawyer said, moving the papers. Rachel took the pen, her hand shaking. She looked at Michael, hoping to see some spark of what had been before, but his face was motionless. He signed first. His handwriting was firm. Rachel followed, her signature looking foreign. "Thank you," Michael said to the lawyer, his voice level. Rachel nodded, unable to speak. They left the office together, but stopped at the parking lot. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck. "See you Saturday," Michael said, referring to the day she would pick up Jake. "He's waiting for you." "Okay," she whispered, her eyes burning with tears. He nodded and walked to his car. Rachel watched him leave, feeling their story end not with a bang, but with quiet sadness, like a leaf falling from a tree. She knew their love for Jake would remain, but their love for each other died, and it was her fault. Spring 2020 has arrived in Austin with blooming gardens and mild sunshine. Michael, 35, stood in the yard of their old house, holding a shovel. Jake, age 8, was nearby, his hands stroking the ground where they were going to plant a new tree, a maple tree that Michael had chosen for its bright autumn leaves. 6 months passed after the divorce, and Michael's life began to take on a new rhythm. He still worked, but he took fewer shifts, making time for Jake, for himself. "Are you ready, boy?" he asked, smiling at his son. Jake nodded, his eyes sparkling. He took a handful of earth and threw it into the hole, just as Michael had taught. Michael looked at him, feeling his heart fill. Jake was his center, his reason to live. He thought about Rachel, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. He forgave her, not with words, but with his heart, because he knew that love for his son was more important than any pain. They watered the tree, and Michael put his hand on Jake's shoulder. "This is your tree," he said. "It will grow with you." Jake looked at him, his smile rare but bright. Michael felt that he was starting to live again, not as before, but in a new way, with hope. Rachel returned to the podcast she started after TEDx, but her voice has changed. It has become deeper, more honest. She talked about forgiveness, about pain, about how love for a child can heal. Her listeners felt this, and her words still helped others, but not herself. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.